Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But first, as promised, I want to talk to John Mann, the Labour MP for Bassett Law, because you may have noticed in recent weeks there's been a sense, and maybe we're seeing what we want to see or imagining things, but there's been a sense that some people in positions of prominence and power are very keen to see questions that are being asked about historic child sex abuse by VIPs in general, and perhaps politicians in particular, don't get asked quite as loudly as they were over the last few months. You've sensed, I think, in some newspapers and some media outlets, a desire for the investigations to be conducted rather more quietly, if at all. Leon Britton's posthumous reputation was apparently shredded by the Deputy Labour leader, Tom Watson, but the fate of that file that Leon Britton claimed he couldn't remember and then suddenly remembered actually he could remains unknown. So I don't know whether there's distraction tactics underway, but I do know that the so-called Dickens dossier, which was assembled by two Conservative MPs and handed to the then Home Secretary Leon Britton by the Conservative MP, the late Conservative MP Geoffrey Dickens in 1984, is back in the news. And the reason it's back in the news is that John Mann has been given a copy, he says, by the same person that gave the original dossier to Geoffrey Dickens. Have I represented the facts correctly, John Mann?
You've got it exactly right. And this dossier, which the Prime Minister had a big inquiry to discover, or part of there were two actual dossiers. It's the second one.
Yes. But
the Prime Minister had an inquiry to find it. No one found anything in the whole of government.
This was the review conducted by Peter Wanless, the Chief Executive of the NSPCC. Nothing to see here, he said.
Could find absolutely nothing. Well, I've got a copy. The police have got a copy. The police are investigating it. It's pretty dramatic, the information in it. I've no idea, of course, whether it's true or not, but it's very precise allegations, its locations, its organisations, its names, and it should have been investigated in 1984, and it clearly wasn't.
Do we have any idea why it wasn't?
It's a bit difficult without... I've always left the police to get on rather than naming the names.
Yes,
it's a little difficult without revealing some of the detail within it, but I think there's some detail in it which would create even bigger eyebrows being raised.
I understand.
The fact that it hasn't been investigated. There is no... I've read it. I've given it to the police. They're speaking this week, I believe. They're starting to speak to I know they are, to the person who gave it to Geoffrey Dickens originally, having got it from two Conservative MPs. There's an awful lot in that needs investigating, and even a cursory look at some of the individuals named raises further questions. It's not possible. It is not possible that was not investigated in 1984 other than by a calculated decision not to do so.
To park it.
It's the only possibility that someone decided this wasn't going to be looked at because it was too sensitive.
We've heard a lot, and you may not be the man to answer this, John, but we've heard a lot about Geoffrey Dickens, of course, since this dossier was more widely discussed. What can you tell me about why it was put together in the first place? It was two other Conservative MPs, wasn't it, who assembled the original document? It
was, and it's stuff that had actually... they'd been hammering away at this for a couple of years.
I'm just going to name them, actually, because Sir Victor Raikes and Anthony Courtney, who are both now dead, so they were Conservative MPs as well, and Dickens was a Conservative MP going to a Conservative Home Secretary, so all of these people...
They were former Conservative MPs.
Right.
They weren't in 1984.
OK.
Intriguingly, both of them had been heavily connected with British intelligence, and
right.
Anthony Courtney had, in fact, been in charge of... the anti-Soviet spy operations for the country. So he's a major figure.
And they're not fly-by-night figures or fantasists, then, by any stretch of the imagination.
No, they're not. And this isn't something that was done vaguely. In fact, part of what I've passed on includes a letter from Victor Raikes. And that was 3 years before, it was 1981. So he'd been hammering away at some allegations that he'd been making. Courtney was making the same allegations as well. they were very precise, and they were about, and it says, a set of paedophile rings. Now, whether the allegations are true, of course, I've no idea. It's not for me to judge. It's for the police and Crown prosecution to judge. But there's an awful lot in it.
Yes, of course, and that hasn't been investigated at all.
That lends itself to an automatic investigation. It isn't vague stuff. Some of it's highly precise stuff. A specific location is identified where it's alleged that various sex crimes took place, and it names the people it says were involved. So it's it may or may not be true, but it's not some vague list of names that's kind of drawn up from nowhere. It's either highly malicious stuff, or it's stuff that's true.
Highly significant. Yes, and we need to know which. And you heard
to be investigated.
Okay, and it is being. So we will watch this space. But before you go, I think you heard my introduction. Did you recognise that description of a sense abroad that there was a movement in the last couple of months away from the investigation? There was an attempt to discredit, I think I'd use that word, some of the key figures.
There is indeed, and there are people going around trying to rubbish the whole idea that there was any widespread sex abuse in this country. Well, I know from the people who've come to me, not about VIPs, but about non-public figures and abuse that's taken place. There's huge amounts of it. But I also know, having seen some of this stuff, and having given other things to the police as well, that there were important people involved. We have seen so-called celebrities who've been jailed, major names who have been jailed, and there were politicians as well, and other figures of authority who clearly were involved in this, and that's why the police investigation should be going on. And this rubbishing of the evidence by people who've seen nothing, spoken to nothing, people who are guessing. Well, I'm not guessing. I'm passing on everything I get to the police. I'm not making a judgment. I'm not ruining anyone's reputation by naming them. I'm sure it'd be front page if I did, but I think that's inappropriate.
You toyed with the idea, didn't you? Didn't you toy with the idea?
Well, if the police weren't going to investigate, it'd be a different proposition.
Sure.
But they are. I do have a faith in the Metropolitan Police in taking this forward. I've had a series of productive meetings with them. I have faith in them. That's good news. But there is a separate question. Where did this dossier go? It is not possible that this simply disappeared at the back of a filing cabinet. It's dynamite, some of the allegations in it. It's not something that could disappear. It's either, malicious, mischievous, vindictive, libelous allegations made by these two now dead Tory MPs, or some of it or all of it is true. Either way, it's pretty big league. And the idea that it just disappeared from the Home Office, absolutely not possible. Someone decided not to investigate, and that begs further questions, and that as well should be investigated.
Indeed. John Mann, MP, whatever the rest of the media might be doing, you'll always be welcome here to tell us the latest developments in your work on this front. But of course, more importantly, the investigations that work is continuing to inspire. And choosing my words very, very carefully, because I'm talking about friends and colleagues in some cases. I don't understand why everybody isn't desperate just to get answers, even if it turns out that some of the allegations are wrong, or some of the people who've come forward have come forward for horribly mistaken reasons. The idea that it's all bogus is just almost untenable. Why is there not a greater appetite out there? And unfortunately, any feasible answer to that question is ugly.